Adventurers sail across an ocean in search of a new life. They forge a nation that will become the most powerful in the world. But the pursuit of freedom turns friends into foes. The price of American independence is war. May 1610, a ship called the Deliverance sails toward America. A 120 years after Columbus, it's still a perilous journey. On board is John Rolfe, a 24-year-old English farmer in search of a new life. Crossing the Atlantic takes at least 2 months, sometimes longer. 70% of early adventurers like Rolfe will be dead within a year. But to Rolfe, the risks seem worth it. North America is a land of opportunity. A continent of vast, untapped wealth, starting with the most valuable resource of all, land. A blanket of 50 billion trees covers half of what will become home to more than 300 million people. Further west, up to 60 million bison roam 14.5 million square kilometers of wilderness. Whilst underground are said to be gems, silver, and some of the largest seams of gold in the world. The settlers expect nothing less than El Dorado. But what Rolfe finds at the English settlement of Jamestown is hell on earth. 3 years before, the colony was founded by 500 settlers.
Hello? Hello?
When Rolfe arrives, barely 60 remain. They've been through a winter of starvation. Having fed on horses and other animals, we ate boots, shoes, and any other leather we came across. 3 months before Rolfe's arrival, a man was burned at the stake for killing his pregnant wife and planning to eat her. The English colonists were unprepared for this new world and unwilling to perform manual labor. Instead of livestock, they brought chemical tests for gold that they never find. And this is not uninhabited land. They've built Jamestown in the middle of a Native American empire. 60 starving settlers surrounded by up to 20,000 members of the Powhatan Nation, armed with bows and arrows that are up to 9 times faster to reload and fire than an English musket. They're soon enemies. But John Rolfe's arrival is the beginning of a new approach. He's come with a plan. There's money in tobacco, and England is addicted. Up until now, it's only been grown in the Spanish colonies. The Spanish control the worldwide trade. They've even made selling tobacco seeds to foreigners punishable by death. But John Rolfe has got his hands on some. No one knows how. In the warm, humid climate and fertile soil around Chesapeake Bay and Jamestown, Rolfe's tobacco plants flourish. The first large harvest is worth more than $1 million in today's money.
The great strength of America is our people. If you want to know what is the defining strength of America, it is our people, our immigrant tradition, our bringing in cultures from all over the world.
I know what goes into making success, and when somebody's really successful, it's rarely luck. It's talent, it's brain power, it's lots of other things.
In 1614, Rolfe marries the daughter of the king of the Powhatan Empire. Her name becomes legend, Pocahontas. In 1616, the couple travel to England, where she becomes a celebrity. A portrait of her face advertising life in the new world. Shakespeare is inspired by the colony, England's rich invest money in it, and Virginia becomes the talk of London. A land of plenty. Within 2 years, tobacco turns Jamestown from a starving hellhole to America's first boom town. By 1619, nearly 1,000 more settlers arrived, including around 20 from Angola. They're slaves, but some of the first Africans in Virginia go on to own their own land.
12 years after the founding of Jamestown, Africans were playing a shaping role in the creation of the colonies. That's pretty incredible.
30 years later, there are over 20,000 settlers in Virginia. America is founded on tobacco. For the next century and a half, it's the continent's largest export. Ten years after John Rolfe's arrival in Jamestown, another group of English settlers lands in North America. They come ashore on a deserted beach some 700 kilometers further up the coast. They named their new settlement Plymouth, after the English port they sailed from. These are a different breed of settler, a group of religious dissidents with faith at the center of their lives. They made the dangerous Atlantic crossing, seeking freedom to practice their religion. Among them is a 24-year-old apprentice printer, Edward Winslow. He arrives on a boat called the Mayflower. By April 1621, their settlement is taking shape. The Mayflower returns to England. The Pilgrims are on their own, in an unknown land.
A great hope and inward zeal we had of laying some great foundation for the propagating and advancing the gospel of the kingdom of Christ in those remote parts of the world.
There are 19 families, goats, chickens, pigs and dogs. They have spinning wheels, chairs, books, guns, and no way home.
If you create this environment as a land of opportunity, then you're going to attract those type of people who want to take that risk, who want to take that gamble, and who believe in a better life.
They were heading for the Hudson River, but they've landed more than 300 kilometers further north at the beginning of winter. They've arrived in the middle of a mini ice age with temperatures 2 degrees colder than today. Winters are longer, growing seasons shorter. The soil is poor, little grows, food supplies soon run low. In the first 3 months, more than half the pilgrims die. William Bradford is the governor of a community soon in desperate trouble.
It pleased God to visit us with death daily. Disease was everywhere. The living were scarcely able to bury the dead. They died sometimes 2 or 3 a day. Of 100 in our persons, scarce 50 remained.
At times, only 6 workers are fit enough to continue building their shelters. Susanna White's husband dies that first winter. Edward Winslow's wife perishes a month after. Within weeks, White and Winslow marry. They'll have 5 children. Today, more than 10% of all Americans can trace their ancestry back to these first 50 pilgrims. But their new world is not built on virgin soil. As at Jamestown, there were others here first. April 1621. 100 pilgrims have landed in North America. After 5 months of winter, barely half survive. They're also not the first Europeans to visit this coast. 5 years earlier, European explorers landed here and brought plague. Almost 9 out of 10 of the local people were wiped out. Now the surviving Pokanoket don't want enemies. They want peace. They teach the English how to grow crops in sandy soil, using fish for fertilizer. But they want something in return. They have a common enemy, a rival tribe, and the English have powerful weapons. The pilgrims aren't soldiers, but in the new world they have to fight to survive. On August 14th, 1621, pilgrims and Pokanoket unite to launch a surprise attack they hope will safeguard both their futures.
It was resolved to send 14 men, well armed, and to fall upon them in the night. The captain gave charge, let none pass out.
Ambushed, the Poconokeets' rivals have no answer for English firepower. The successful raid is a chance for unlikely allies to find common ground.
We have found the Indians very faithful in their covenant of peace with us. They are people without any religion or knowledge of any god, yet very trusty, quick of apprehension, ripe-witted, and just.
Pilgrims and Poconoket seal their friendship with a meal. In time, it will become a celebration every American recognizes: Thanksgiving.
One of the main themes in the founding of America was a place to do business, a place to expand your horizons, a place to live a life of your own, practice your own religion. Those are the basic themes that brought people to these shores to colonize.
The success of these colonists begins a period of prosperity and rapid expansion. From Jamestown and Plymouth, their descendants spread out across the Atlantic seaboard. Tens of thousands more Europeans followed them across the Atlantic in search of a better life. Within a century and a half, they found 13 separate colonies. From Jamestown, agriculture spreads across the south. Dirt farms are transformed into sprawling plantations. Irish, Germans and Swedes push back the frontier. The Dutch bring commerce to a small island at the mouth of the Hudson River. First called New Amsterdam, it is soon renamed New York. Within a few generations, the colonists are an average of 2 inches taller than their English counterparts. Their children are twice as likely to reach adulthood. They're 20% wealthier and pay only a quarter of the tax. Many still regard themselves as British subjects, but the strains are beginning to show. Nowhere more so than in Boston. May 9th, 1768. 7 generations after John Rolfe's first tobacco harvest, the British government has put up taxes. A British customs official springs a surprise raid on a ship belonging to John Hancock, one of the richest men in Boston. Hancock's crew has other ideas. They're carrying 100 casks of imported wine and don't want to pay the duty. Hancock claims he's making a stand against unfair taxes imposed by a king nearly 5,000 kilometers away. To the British, he's just a common smuggler. The British seize Hancock's ship, triggering riots that sweep through Boston.
We didn't want to pay taxes to a king and to a parliament where we didn't have a voice and we didn't have any representation. We have a natural resentment toward government, which was how we were born.
The king responds by sending 4,000 redcoats to Boston.
Boston was a city of commerce, culture, civilization, and revolution unfolding right before the eyes of the colonists and the eyes of the British.
In October 1768, British soldiers clamped down on Boston. is a port crucial to the British Empire. Its dockyards are some of the busiest in the world, producing up to 200 ships a year from America's vast timber reserves. A third of all British shipping is built in the colonies. Timber fuels the 18th century global economy, much like oil does today. Across New England, blaze marks identify the tallest, strongest trees selected by the British Crown for the masts of British ships. In Boston, there's one red-coated British soldier for every 4 colonists. It's a city under occupation. A prominent businessman, silversmith Paul Revere, watches the troops take control.
They formed and marched with insolent parade. Drums beating, fifes playing, and colors flying. Each soldier having received 16 rounds of powder and ball.
He is an upper middle class figure, someone who has risen through his own efforts, his own talent. He represents what we have created on our own with very little help from our cousins across the Atlantic.
When revolution comes, Revere will be at its center. The American colonies are critical to Britain's economic prosperity. Boston is a gateway to a market that accounts for 40% of British exports. And American taxes are also taken by the British Crown. The American fishing fleet ships out thousands of tons of salted cod and returns with sugar and molasses to make rum. The British tax both. In Africa, the rum is then used to buy the most profitable cargo of all. African slaves. Between 1700 and 1800, more than 250,000 Africans are brought to the American colonies. More slaves than all other immigrant groups combined. Most slaves wind up on large plantations in the South, but they're also critical to the economy of the North. 10% of Boston's population is black. Boston is a melting pot, and tension is building.
Nobody likes invaders in their homes. To have people here, foreigners on your soil, is a great incentive for people to fight.
On March 5th, 1770, after 3 days of unrest, an angry mob roams the streets. Hundreds of men who blame the British for losing their jobs gather on King Street. They face off against 8 redcoats who've been ordered not to fire. A 17-year-old wigmaker's apprentice, Edward Garrick, provokes a soldier. This is how wars start. Private Hugh Montgomery is hit with a club. African-American, Crispus Attucks, dies instantly. When the smoke clears, 4 more are dead. Boston's political radicals seize the moment. Silversmith and engraver Paul Revere quickly turns the bloodshed into anti-British propaganda. His engraving creates outrage across the 13 colonies.
Unhappy Boston, see thy sons deplore, thy hallowed walks besmeared with guiltless gore, whilst faithless Preston and his savage bands, with murderous rancor, stretch their bloody hands.
An explosive image with a title that says it all. The Bloody Massacre.
There was the old joke, you give me a picture, I'll give you a war. Those who wanted to stir things up and to make a statement and maybe even lead a revolution, it made them able to rally others to their side.
News spreads fast. Boston has a weekly newspaper, and the colonists are avid readers. There are more than 40 papers across the colonies, and a new postal delivery system has been introduced by the new Postmaster General, Benjamin Franklin. Night riders cut the delivery time in half. The communications network connecting the colonies is one of the best in the world. Before news reaches England, most of America already knows about the Boston Massacre.
It's a very American spirit of an idea, this idea that everybody should have access to knowledge. It's very much like that pioneering idea. Everybody should be able to make their way in the world.
The massacre isn't the only explosive news to come out of Boston. In December 1773, the Boston Gazette breaks another story that will fan the flames of rebellion. Britain has repealed all taxes except one, on tea. In one of the most famous acts of resistance in history, rebels dump over $1 million worth of tea into Boston Harbor.
When someone comes along and smacks us, we don't turn the other cheek. That's not who we are.
The British respond by closing down Boston Harbor. One of America's busiest, wealthiest ports.
Come on out.
Hundreds lose their jobs.
Come on out.
The British plan to strangle any resistance from the rebellious colony of Massachusetts. But the plan is about to backfire dramatically. It isn't just taxes fueling discontent with British rule. Settlers are pushing west, and many have their eyes set on new land beyond the Appalachian Mountains. But the British have banned new settlements west of a boundary called the Proclamation Line. The line divides British land from land belonging to Native Americans. To enforce it, hundreds are evicted from their homes. September 5th, 1774.
We want liberty.
Incensed at the British actions, 56 delegates from across the colonies gather at the First Continental Congress in Philadelphia. It's the first step on the road to American independence. Among them are radicals John Adams, Patrick Henry, and a gentleman landowner from Virginia named George Washington.
At a time when our lordly masters in Great Britain will be satisfied with nothing less than the deprivation of American freedom, it seems highly necessary that something should be done to maintain liberty.
Across New England, people prepare to defend themselves. Smuggled arms are collected and stashed in secret hideaways. But while many expect conflict, most delegates in Philadelphia want peace with Britain.
A military action would make a wound that would never be healed.
Let's go, come on.
The First Continental Congress resolves that a British attack on any one colony would be regarded as an attack on all of them. What emerges at Philadelphia is solidarity.
The distinctions between Virginians, Pennsylvanians, New Englanders, and New Yorkers are no more. I'm not a Virginian. I am an American.
The future of the 13 American colonies hangs in the balance.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Spring 1775, near Concord, Massachusetts.
Get those weapons stacked up. We haven't got all day.
Local gunsmith Isaac Davis puts the town militia through basic training.
American patriots knew that they were doing the right thing. You're starting a birth of a nation. You know, you had to really believe in what you were doing.
You got to keep this clean here, sir. You keep that clean, it'll save your life. You don't?
If war comes, this will be America's first line of defense, a volunteer home guard.
Gentlemen, it's looking good. It's looking good. Let's have some breakfast and move out. Show those redcoats what...
They're ordinary Americans, farmers, blacksmiths, and shopkeepers.
The militiamen of any of the colonies were made up of just its citizens. It was a citizen-based protection unit. And some of them had some skills, but some of them were just the carpenters. Some of them were just the mason or the blacksmith. I mean, these were the guys that they had something at stake to protect their colony. So they started to form together, just trying to help protect each other.
Every town across the colonies has its own militia. But by 1775, they're preparing to defend themselves against the British Army. In Massachusetts, a third of all men aged between 16 and 50 must be ready to bear arms at a minute's notice.
Excellent. Good shots. We keep this up, we're going to give those redcoats a scare, all right?
At midnight on April 19th, 1775, 900 British redcoats leave their Boston barracks for Lexington and Concord, about 30 kilometers away. Their orders: arrest the rebel leaders and seize their weapons. But news of the plan leaks out to Paul Revere, who sets off ahead of them to alert the militias. His warning spreads from town to town across the New England countryside. Revere arrives in Lexington ahead of the British.
The British are coming. We need to warn the militia. Get them together. Come on.
By 5 in the morning, 60 militia, commanded by Farmer John Parker, face hundreds of well-armed and highly experienced British redcoats. What happens next will change the course of history. Sunrise, April 19th, 1775. On one side, 60 men, poorly armed and barely trained. On the other, hundreds of professional soldiers from the most powerful army in the world. An untested militia versus an army that in the past 20 years has fought to victory on 5 continents. But the rebels stand ready to fight.
These guys were revolutionaries, they were scallywags, they were rebels. Some of them were gentlemen farmers, some of them were overeducated, some of them were undereducated. It really was the birth of a nation.
The Lexington militia gathers on the village common. Dairy farmers and shopkeepers, but also among them are free African Americans and slaves.
It is a unique experience that African Americans have had in the military in America. African Americans fought for the country even before it was a country.
African Americans like Prince Estabrook.
You give me training, you give me a weapon, and I can perform as well as you can, then there is no power on earth that's going to hold me down forever.
Stand your ground. Don't fire unless fired upon. But if we mean to have war, let it begin here.
Captain John Parker once fought on the side of the British. A quarter of the men standing at his side are related to him. No one knows who fires the first shot at Lexington. But it's the shot heard round the world.
I mean, the redcoats, that's intimidating. The way they move, the way they march, the way they execute on that open space. I imagine on some level for the guy who works the printing press, this is overwhelming, beyond anything you could possibly articulate in words.
Prince Estabrook is hit in the first volley. The rebels are outnumbered and outclassed. Within minutes of the first shots fired at Lexington, 8 rebels are dead, 10 wounded. The American Revolution has begun. The Redcoats reach Concord at 9 a.m. Acting on a tip-off from colonists loyal to the Crown, they raid the militia's arms stash. But the rebels have got there first. British continue to search for weapons, giving the rebels more time to spread the word. The militia gathers just outside the town of Concord. By late morning, more than 1,000 men have arrived from the surrounding villages. Their plan was to defend their towns against the British.
Let's go!
After Lexington, the stakes have changed. The British troops set off on their 30-kilometer march back to Boston. And rebels take their revenge. The deaths at Lexington unite these men against British rule. Gunsmith and militia leader Isaac Davis takes a bullet through the heart. The rebels seize the upper hand, intent on making the British pay. They shadow the redcoats march home, firing on them all the way. A third of the redcoats are killed or wounded. Seven generations after the first settlers left England in search of prosperity and freedom, their descendants will have to fight for these rights. Standing in their way is the might of the world's greatest military superpower.